know, all this fuss about the computer bug has had a terrible effect on Ephesia. She now looks on the black side of everything constantly, anticipates the worst, and dreads the future. For the first time in 40 years, we are on the same wavelength. But let's not take all the predictions in the Bible too literally. Tonight, I want to take a long, cold, hard, rational look at what the new century will really mean. It's going to be hell.
Well then, Ricky Fulton was a great comedy performer. His work didn't really translate as well on television, but if you've ever been to see Francie and Josie, and I certainly did when I was younger, the sheer presence they had at the King's Theatre is legendary. Never really experienced anything like that before, anything like that again. He was known for several characters. That one was Reverend I Am Jolly, and never a truer word spoken. He's quite famous for joking about Sidney Devine's singing skills. Quite a few funny sketches still on YouTube, and but really, obviously the BBC used that character as sort of to make fun of the Church of Scotland, which really the remnants of it were still alive during the 90s, during maybe 20 years ago. But now it's truly split. Satan divides and conquers. A lot of divisions the past 10 years in the body of Christ. But now we're waiting for the big one, which is the mark of the beast. And I got a dream about Scotland just a few nights ago. The Lord showed me the cities in Scotland, so we'll go through the cities. I'm obviously born in Scotland. I was born in Dumfries. I've lived most of my life in the Glasgow area. I was offered a scholarship in Edinburgh, so I've got relatives through in the east and through in the west as well. I've been to Aberdeen a couple of times. You know, as a youngster, we all supported Aberdeen when they were beating like Real Madrid and all these big teams when they won the Cup Winners' Cup, I think it was. And with Alex Ferguson, who was an ex-Rangers man, an ex-Rangers player. But anyway, for such a small nation, Scotland's got a huge history, a very rich history, famous writers like Robert Louis Stevenson, you know, like Sir Walter Scott, many. The list just goes on. Especially Sir Walter Scott's a very interesting guy to read when you start to read some of his books. Just the language during the 18th century, I think it was 18th or 19th century. It was a very honest type of storytelling language, very refreshing. Like nothing really today. Like the disaster, if you've ever read Trainspotting, it's just horrible to read. Very like just there's actually it's full of spelling errors. It's full of grammatical errors. You know, the book itself. I don't know if that's deliberate or not.
Is it because I was black?
You're black?
For who?
Huh? Who's black?
Your eyes.
No, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't have time. Sorry.
You've just been rude to me from the first
Right,
moment.
right. I'm sorry. Sorry.
Trying to tell me I don't speak English.
Well, right.
I'm not going to talk about cinematography of Scotland. The one really good film in Scotland I used to enjoy as a kid is one called Geordie. That's, if you can get a hold of that on YouTube, that'll be a good one to watch. But anyway, the Lord was telling me that Satan is going to divide Scotland. Now, it is quite a deeply divided country as it is religiously, obviously since the Reformation. Let me just get this mosquito. Too fast for me right now. anyhow, so what I'd definitely like to just say, we'll go through the cities in Scotland. I'll put a little sketch, another Ricky Fulton sketch at the end. Basically, Francine Josie sketch, really, really funny. And never again a truer word spoken. It's about the police in Glasgow. The police are quite notorious in Glasgow for being quite scandalous, just let's say. There's a lot of words you can use for them. But anyway, we've probably all experienced something about Glasgow police, especially if you're going out preaching as well. You get some very good ones and you get some really, really, really bad ones as well. I suppose that's true in every city. You know, when I travelled Germany, they were particularly bad in Frankfurt, which I'd visited before. But for I think it's only 4 cities in Scotland. If you count Inverness, I'm not really sure if you can count Inverness as a city, but we'll start there. Inverness is full of New Age-isms. There's quite a lot of English people moved there, and they all seem to be into New Age. They all seem to be... I got certain dreams and visions when I went to Inverness, and obviously later on I discovered that Aleister Crowley had a house there. And so what the Lord showed me was that there was what was called rainbow prophets that were going to emerge in the last days, and they would greatly deceive not just Scotland, but it would be probably a wider movement than just in Scotland. And I could probably identify 1 or 2 by watching God TV. I've yet to really... Well, I've made videos obviously tackling the likes of, Benny Hinn. I've made videos about Todd White. I know there's a good few of my fellow countrymen, Christians, that are standing with me in these things. And yet there's still quite a lot of Christians that follow after these guys. Usually they're new Christians, they don't have much discernment, and they're a little bit headstrong people. You know, they like to they're quite impressed with what you see visually, and that's about how far they go into things. Quite unimpressive, but obviously if you've got spiritual maturity, then you really pray and you study things in the Holy Spirit and ask the Lord to reveal things to you. And so that's very, very important. You know, when I was at Inverness, I had the word about these rainbow prophets. They're from Satan. And I think you can just Google that, type that in, and a whole number of New Age stuff just comes up. That's the type of place it is. It's probably like California. It's like the California of Scotland, Inverness. Very, very strange, weird people. There is witchcraft there, obviously. You'll drive past trees where you'll see like offerings on the tree, and like pagans do in India. You'll have that in Inverness. And as I said, most of them have moved up from England somewhere. And probably most of them have been followers of Aleister Crowley. Now, I'll move down to Glasgow. Glasgow are some of the most down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth people that you'll ever meet. I believe penicillin may have been starting, and there's a lot of inventions that were started in Glasgow and Edinburgh, but specifically my dad always said that Glasgow should be the capital of Scotland. And why is that? Because the Scots are from the west coast of Scotland. That was the dominant tribe, but not dominant through military campaigns, dominant through Christianity. They were born again Christians, St. Columba. And if you don't know the history about that, I made videos about that. But you go to Iona Abbey, you still see a Jerusalem Bible there. So the west coast, Glasgow area, very, very interesting Christian area. There's had a lot of battles with the Catholic Church for over 1,000 years, 1,500 years, as long as the Catholic Church has been around. You know, there's been battles in that area for Christian dominance or Roman Catholic dominance. The Scots being an Irish tribe who are born again. So it is I know quite a lot of artists in Glasgow. It's quite, people love music and art there. It is a rough city, you know. It used to have a blade culture, There's a lot of razor gangs back during when my dad stayed in Drumchapel. He stayed in Maryhill and Drumchapel. Had quite a rough upbringing, but actually became the Ducks, which means that the best performer or the cleverest pupil in the school. And I know his cousin went on to be very high up in the Navy. He became a captain, some sort of rank there, and did very well. Got his own personal jet. My dad suffered from asthma, which now, if he was alive today, they would be probably wheeling him into, the hospital to check him for COVID. But he's quite asthmatic, and that stopped him from having a military career. But otherwise, he was a headmaster. He was. That's how I got offered my scholarship in Edinburgh, because he basically graduated from Edinburgh University. My dad was one of probably the most interesting people you could ever meet. He really would. I remember I went to a wedding with him, and literally he was the life and soul of that wedding. There's about 40 or 50 guests there, and he was singing. They allowed him to sing. He was a tenor as well. He could tell stories, and all of that. He was quite funny, but his poor health was what, without going too much into what happened, I made videos about that. But and finally stayed in Larkhall, which is in the west of Scotland, and that area is obviously a Protestant area. I was brought up a Protestant. My dad was a Protestant, but one of the local, I think he was one of the husbands of the women who were a bit crazy, ended up attacking my dad. He was a Rangers fan as well. So there's all kind of problems. It is a rough place, there's so many things happened to me in Glasgow, in that area. It's really difficult to speak about them all, but it's definitely an interesting. One of the big cathedrals in Glasgow is a Gaelic cathedral, and I think it had its last Gaelic service back in the 60s, but it was used to actually. Part of it was just used to feed and clothe homeless people, which a minister did at least a couple of times a week. So it was used for that. But as I said, Glasgow people are known to be sort of the most friendly in the world. But I would say probably after about the 90s, towards the turn of the century, I think, and I'll be honest, I think because of the police force and how the traffic cops have really, really just destroyed the city. I'll just be open about it. I mean, obviously the trams used to be a big part of the city. They were taken away, I think, back in the 60s again, or 50s or 60s. But it seems to have more traffic wardens and traffic cops than any other city I've ever been to. And when you're waiting at the lights in Glasgow, they seem to take forever. It's almost as if the city has just said, we don't want any cars in it anymore. I mean, how are people meant to get around? There's trains, there's underground. It's almost as if they just don't want cars in it anymore. It's like an Agenda 21 going on. As I said, I've watched videos. There's been future projections of the world population in the next 5 or 10 years. And Glasgow has always been marked. It's funny how even during the Second World War, a third of Glasgow was destroyed. It used to be the city itself used to have a population, I believe, of approaching 2 million. Like the surrounding area used to be like up maybe 3 million or so. But now that's halved. It's about halved in the space of about 50 years. It really tells you that they've really marked that area for population cut. No, I believe that is Satan, because I believe Glasgow is the heart of Scotland, but it's one of the great hearts of Britain as well. Like the big cities like Liverpool, Glasgow, places like that. The people seem to be very friendly and have big hearts, Anyway, we'll move on to Edinburgh. Now there's North Berwick, who has which is a small village. There's Berwick and then there's North Berwick, which is towards Edinburgh. And if you can Google that, and there is a pyramid out towards one of the islands there, which I believe David Icke's visited there a few times, and then there's been the spoonbender guy, what's him, Yuri Galgera. I think he owns that pyramid, or he bought it or something. So, but these pyramids, by the way, they exist in ley lines, and they exist all over the world. They're believed to have been started around South Africa, around that area, like the civilization, pre-flood civilization, was believed to have been started in South Africa. I believe it was really started in West Africa, because I've made videos about the original Atlantis actually being. I believe Bright Insight made a very good video about it, and I've looked at the information before he made a video about it, and I've always spoken that it's a possibility. But then when we did the satellite, he made the video about it. You can see that the Eye of Africa, it's like pretty much 100% ancient Atlantis. Now there's other cities and other, like for example, I believe there's big populations and cities under the Atlantic Ocean, such as in the Bermuda Triangle and off Japan. But these are other areas of the ancient world. But I believe Atlantis was in West Africa, in Mauritania. Now we're talking about Edinburgh. It's a bit of a strange place, Edinburgh. People from the West will say that Edinburghers, or whatever they want to call themselves, they're not real Scots. So the fact is that there's a bit of a mix between Scots and Anglo-Saxons to make up the city of Edinburgh. And also what you've got to realise is when the Knights Templar came over to Scotland, they started building Roslin in the east. I believe they have a prominent presence in Edinburgh. You know, when you start reading websites about the Knights Templar, really their base is Edinburgh, and that's where the Queen is. Obviously, when she's staying in Scotland, she stays in Edinburgh, Holyrood Palace, which stretches out to a grand old scenery where they go hunting and all that stuff. Who knows? They could be there. They could be anywhere. Could be on the moon by now. But we know they've not been in Buckingham Palace for at least four months. What else can we say about Edinburgh? Is obviously the university. It's a very ancient city. Back in, I believe, about 250 years ago, there was what was called the Black Plague, and that plague literally killed. It was a real plague, but again, you see the overreaction to this plague, and you study the overreaction to the thing that was called the Black Plague, and it hit Edinburgh, and it killed, I think, at least half the city's populace at the time. It's buried like between 50 and 100,000 people, and they were literally putting people into coffins while they were still alive. Check that out. And obviously the good thing to study about Edinburgh, and by the way, there is a lot of haunted places there in Edinburgh as well. We did go a bus trip there once, from our primary school, I think it was, to see this haunted place. Would you believe we actually did that? Anyway, and a good thing to study about Edinburgh is Greyfriars Bobby. It's a very, very touching story of a minister in the Covenanters, and they were herded into this graveyard to stay without food or water for 6 months. Most of them, of course, died. But then when this minister died, the dog that belonged to the minister returned to his grave every single day for like several years, to look for his master. Sat there for hours just waiting for him. Very touching story about Greyfriars Bobby, I think that's called. Many more stories about Edinburgh, but we'll move on from there. And we'll go to Dundee, and now the birthplace of the worst poet in the world is said to be an Irish guy that was brought up in Edinburgh, that moved to Dundee, and when the Tay Bridge fell, that was back in about 1860, around about 1870. you can check that out. The writer of that poem is said to be the worst poet in the entire world, and that's compared to Robbie Burns, who's one of the best poets, who's from where I was born, down in Dumfries, down in Ayrshire, and that area. Anyhow, but I think his name was McGonagall. I don't know if it was William McGonagall, but it was something like McGonagall was his name. Said to be the worst poet in the world. So I visited Dundee a few times. It has a statue of a dragon there. I believe the Dundee people have good heart. You know, that Fife area, I believe, is a really good area. I was talking about Glasgow being the sort of maybe Christian heart of Scotland, but you could say like the Fife people have good heart. I would say that like there are a lot of characters there in that area. And I've got a few friends that have been from Dundee. Dundee's a fun place to visit. It's got the ship Discovery there, which I don't know what it discovered, but it discovered something significant anyway, and it's still in the harbour. So it's an interesting name for a ship. I don't know if Star Trek ship was called Discovery as well. I don't know. But I quite like Dundee. It's an interesting place. And then we'll move up. Where can we go now? Like Glenrothes. Rothes is sort of referred to, I believe, as a connection with the Rothschilds. I don't know the full history of that area, but I feel that Glenrothes is connection with Rothschilds. Somebody may correct me on that, by the way. Not really studied a lot about Fife. My grandmother was from that area. She's a very good Christian woman. And then we got the coast towards Aberdeen, and we got the oil industry. We got sort of the home of the Pictish people, the Granite City. You know, it's not the most exciting name of a city in the history of the world, but it is a grey city. It's made from granite mostly. And there is quite a lot of big Illuminati schools around there. When you study that a lot of the royals that went there, you know that President Trump built a golf course around that area. And I think his mother was said to have been from the West Coast, or I'm not sure if she was from there. But anyhow, he chose to build a golf course in that area. And also, as I said, there's Illuminati school people that, you know, that the royals go, the occultists go to sort of study in that area. You can check that out, sort of Google that stuff. And one of the other interesting areas in Scotland is known as the Central Scotland Triangle, or the UFO Triangle, which exists. Actually, I thought that was the mosquito there, I was going to get it. But it exists just around, well, it's Bonnybridge, but I'm trying to think of the town. It's a new town. It's around just the east of Glasgow, but it's actually specifically Bonnybridge. And it stretches across to near where Roslin Chapel is. It's one of the little towns around there. And there's one little village I visited, and you can see that the trees are cut into a certain, what you might call a alien language. Like the trees are actually cut. When you view them down from space, like Google them, like they're not in English, but they're in this sort of alien language, and the trees have been cut that way. When you look at it, there's a lot of strange places around between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It was a place that a lot of children went during the Second World War, when the cities were being bombed by the Nazis, and a lot of them fled to these small towns around central Scotland, you might call it. And there's quite a few strange places around there that the Lord's had me take a drive around there, and I've seen some things that I can't explain. And I think there's a guy that's got a channel on the East Coast that can't quite think of his name right now. Hennessy, I think, is his name. I think his name is Hennessy. But he does tours around one of these small villages that he stays at, and he's seeing strange things all the time. You know, floating orbs, seeing like vehicles change colour on the road, vehicles change shape on the road. You know, so you could be watching a white van driving along, and next thing it'll just change into sort of a black sports car. Stuff like that. You just can't explain. So he believes there's some type of UFO base around there. So they're trying out some sci-fi technology. He believes it's a government base. But anyhow, it's definitely got an occult and demonic connections around some of these areas. Now, that's just scratching the surface of Scotland, really. Like what I've just told you in the past 20 minutes, I've given you a little bit of history about it. You know, sort of recent history, probably things you've never heard me speaking about before. But I believe the Lord is going to try to encourage the Scottish people to come back to Him. And I'm encouraging all the Scottish people that watch this video, come back to the Lord. It doesn't matter what tribe or whatever you are from. Most of us have forgotten, you know, who we are, which tribes we are. You know, when you come to Africa, they all know their tribes and things like that. They can all speak their language, tribe. All the tribes have got languages and so on. We ourselves, as Scots, obviously, the government is still promoting, I think, the Scots Gaelic language, which is very like the Irish Gaelic language, which tells you that it's really from the same people. And if you study that language, there's a lot of words that transliterate, not translate, but transliterate as in they sound the same and they mean the same as in the Hebrew tongue. And I believe it's true that when the Jewish people were researching their own language, one of the languages they researched was the Scots Gaelic language and the Irish Gaelic language to re-establish their Hebrew tongue again, because it had been lost for a long number of years. And they had dialects that were spoken in Europe, like Yiddish and other types of dialects. But the modern Hebrew is a little bit of a variation from the Paleo-Hebrew, from the ancient language. But again, it's another mark to me that the Scottish people, and I've heard many people, as I see on YouTube, try to knock the Scots, that they don't have anything to do with Israel and whatnot. Listen, we got to be born again, but I believe that if you are born again, and you truly are born again, the Lord will give you an affiliation. He'll allocate you a tribe of Israel. I believe that myself. There's not many Christians that have that experience, but I've had that experience myself. And I think it's for you yourself to actually start to pursue these things now, because the churches are closed down. The rhetoric and their propaganda is not being taught anymore to you. You don't have to go and follow their nonsense. You can learn the Word of God from scratch, and I believe that's what the Lord wants the Scottish people to do. Learn their heritage. I'm not talking about making Aliyah to Israel or anything. I'm talking about being born again. I'm talking about being ready for the Lord to come, and then that you will know yourself. The only way to know yourself is when you come to the Lord. The Lord will explain to you who you are, exactly what He wants from you, and He will give you the power to execute whatever He's given you to do. I've met quite a lot of Scottish people that have been called to certain things, for example, to expose the politicians, or for example to fast and pray to have a healing ministry. But the problem is that due to hundreds of years of erosion of the truth, Scottish people have and obviously English people coming and invading, have a real problem about trusting outsiders and even themselves. Like, Scottish people have real trouble trusting people. But obviously the Catholic Church has been a big part of that as well. A lot of Catholics live, and Protestants as well, but they live their lives very recklessly. That's been my experience. I've had Protestant and Catholic friends, as I said, but the Catholic friends have always, they're always cloak and dagger. They're very, very, very sneaky, very, very wicked. They'll backstab you, they'll talk about you behind your back, they'll steal stuff from you. That's been my experience. Sadly, obviously, Scottish television or whatever, the BBC, doesn't reflect that. You know, and I think that there's a sketch of Ricky Fulton as the Reverend I Am Jolly, you know, with whatever it is, transsexual coming in to marry some man or woman, I forget what it is. I know men of God that would literally take them by the scruff of the neck and kick them out, you know. But the Reverend I Am Jolly's this weak little Church of Scotland minister, like, oh, I feel, I don't know what to do and all that, you know. It's meant to be funny. Listen, the identity of Scotland is precious to the Lord. The Lord has built Scotland as a nation, and the Lord will decide when to end Scotland as a country, not any other government. And you got to understand and believe what I'm saying, because Satan will try to use the cities that I've just mentioned to come against other areas. I don't know exactly. I was shown that's what Satan's going to do. So I don't know if it's something to do with wearing masks or the COVID thing or any future vaccinations, so that they'll come and say, oh, well, this city's doing well, this one isn't, you know, and all. I don't know how exactly they'll play cities against one another in the media, but be prepared for that. You know, this message is for Scotland, and love your heritage, love your country, and love the Lord, you know, that forms you. And only the Lord will decide when to end Scotland as a country. And as the Declaration of Independence says, as long as 20 men remain alive, we will fight tyranny with our lives unto death. As long as 20 of us remain alive. Now that was a covenant, I believe, that was made by the fathers of Scotland, which one of my tribes were the chief tribes in Scotland. So that was done on a Bible, with ministers, with clan chiefs present that actually signed that covenant, and then they went and then they took the word of God right round all these towns and cities in Scotland, and then it spread to England, and that's how Britain became a Protestant country. And Satan knows this. Make no mistake, Satan knows this, okay? I know why I've been attacked so much from Satan. I know some of the reasons why anyway. But I'm still here, you know, and I'm a Scotsman, and I'll fight to the death. I hope you will as well. And whatever country you're in, I hope you'll fight to the death for the truth and for the Lord. And as the cry of the Covenanters was, there's only one King, and that's the Lord Yeshua HaMashiach, the Lord Jesus Christ.
We are the backbone of the Polish force. We are the Glasgow Polish Bells. But if you ever need the law, of course we'd rather you got someone else. If we see a man we fancy, though he's doing nothing wrong, we run him in, we run him in, we run him in, we run him in. It is the only thing to do. We run him in, we run him in, we run him in, we run him in. If you were us, well, wouldn't you? And every night when it gets black, we find a car that's parked somewhere